Hello everyone and welcome back to the Professional Diploma in Photography. Did you know, well, this isn't really a did you know, but are you looking at ice cream? Are you looking at mashed potatoes? Very, very difficult to tell. When it comes to food photography, photographers use a huge number of tricks to make food look more appealing, even though sometimes it is not exactly what it seems. We'll be having a look a little bit later on in the lesson on how you can fake it with your food photography. So of course you are here with myself, William Eames, your educator as always. And as I always say at the start of every lesson, showing up is the key to success. You really should be seeing a huge amount of progression with your photography at this stage. Your knowledge in photography, your terminology around photography, and hopefully your ideas around photography too. As usual, if you have any questions, please do remember to ask Morpheus. Tries to answer as many questions as he can. If there's anything you can't answer, do please let us know. Support at shawacademy.com, and as usual, do rate those responses. So, this lesson is all about food photography, a very fast growing area of photography, especially in terms of its commercial side, in terms of your ability to make money as a photographer. It is a very lucrative area. It's also a very fascinating area to explore, especially if you're into cooking and you have yourself a blog, or you're really into food and nutrition. You want to be doing your own photographs for your own website, or if you plan to get out there and start selling some of your photographs, if you're doing some stock photography, or you want to sell some of your images to cookbooks or restaurants and so on, there's a huge demand for this type of photography. So I think it's a very good time to have a look at it and to cover it. So we're going to have a look, first of all, where to start, how to get yourself prepared. We'll have a look at some equipment. You don't need a huge amount of equipment to do food photography, which is a great thing about it. And then we'll have a look at some ways that you can, I suppose, fake it, and some tricks and tips that you can use as well. And really, when it comes to food photography, it's all about preparation. It's all about being creative, and really it's almost like cooking itself. You really need to consider the ingredients and everything that you use. So let's have a look at where to start. And the very first thing that you should do is to make a list of exactly what it is that you want to photograph. It's almost like a shopping list that you're going to be making here. What type of food do you want to photograph? Do you want to photograph gourmet food? Do you want to photograph kind of rustic food? Do you want to photograph desserts? Do you want to photograph cakes? You need to think about this, because you're going to need lots of props, lots of accessories, and lots of ingredients. So you definitely want to plan what type of food it is that you're going to photograph. I think it's a good idea to sketch out a few different angles, a few different ideas on the placement of where the food is going to be, the colors that you're going to be using, some props that you might like to try out with it as well. Consider your prop placement in those sketches, and props are going to be key really to filling the photograph and making it look more appetizing. You want to consider where your light is going to be coming from, what type of light you're going to be photographing. You're going to be prepared to photograph for hours. So this is something you're going to spend quite a bit of time photographing. You should be shooting for at least about 2 hours maximum, exploring every kind of possibility, every angle that you can get out of the food. Think about the theme. What are you going to be photographing? Is it going to be editorial, kind of work you'd see in a magazine? Is it going to be commercial, something that you'd see for advertisements, for restaurants? Or is it just for fun? Is it for yourself? Is it for a blog? Is it for Instagram? Is it just something you're going to be sharing on social media? Where are these photographs going to be seen? Quite similar to the previous point. Who exactly is going to be seeing these photographs? Who are your target market? Is it going to be for something for a business, or is it something just for personal use? Because it will change how you think about the photographs. So these are the questions that you should be asking yourself before you go out and you start purchasing all your ingredients. You're also going to need a location to photograph, and when it comes to food photography, natural light works best, especially for natural ingredients. If you're after kind of a rustic, kind of homely feel, definitely using natural light, so close to a window, where plenty of light is coming through. You can set up a little studio, a little workbench like you can see here in the photograph here, with a little bit of texture there as well thrown in. You can see some use of props there as well to make everything look more appealing. Artificial lights do allow more control, and they're better for processed foods, so things like candies or chocolates, anything like that, where you might be playing a lot more with colourful backgrounds. You might want to experiment with more dynamic kind of setups, and especially as well for liquor, for hard drinks as well. Typically they'd be shot in a more type of studio-like environment, so you may want to be looking at artificial lights for that type of work. Combination can be used effectively as well, so you can also use natural light and boost it with artificial light too, using the studio light. You can mix the two of them together to help out balance and avoid any hard shadows. And a reflector, which we'll talk about in a moment, is a must-have piece of equipment when it comes to this type of photography. Certainly for studio and portrait photography, it's also very, very useful. But a reflector will bounce light back onto the subject, so you can use it in conjunction with natural light to help bring back some of that light back onto your food and to reduce those shadows. You really don't want to have two very hard shadows in your photographs. So once you've made your decisions about what to shoot and where to shoot, then the next thing to get it is to get out there and to pick up your ingredients. Now, the first thing you need to remember when you're buying ingredients is you are not going to be eating this food. So whatever it is you decide that you're going to be cooking, if there's a particular ingredient that, say, you don't like onions, for example, can be quite divisive, or mushrooms, that doesn't mean that you shouldn't buy them, because you're not going to be eating this food. You're going to be photographing this food, so you can experiment with foods that you normally wouldn't eat or that you normally don't like. Use natural ingredients. Natural ingredients look fresher, they're more colourful. They won't last as long, but you're not going to be using them for very long. You're going to be cooking them, you're going to be photographing them for about 2 hours, and then really that's going to be it. Buy as fresh as possible, and make sure you have enough. You want to make sure that you're buying enough so that if there's any kind of bruising to the food, that you can replace it with something else. That you can also use the extra food as props, and that you just have enough to cover yourself to make sure that you have full plates. Don't forget garnishes, very important. So all these little things that we use to garnish our food, like salt and pepper, lots of vegetables, herbs are great for it as well. They add lots and lots of colour, but they're great for filling space with this type of photography as well. You are going to be using them an awful lot, so make sure to get lots of garnishes. Bread is also a great thing to use as well. Fresh bread, fresh baguettes or brown bread. Great for adding a bit of texture, but it's also great for filling up space as well. It goes with so many different types of food. Very, very versatile ingredient. Fruit and vegetables add loads and loads of colour. Should be very obvious, but peppers, like your red, your green, your yellow peppers, a great trio of colours there. Tomatoes, red onions are great for adding lots of colour too. So much variety, so much colour when it comes to fruit and veg. So do think about what it is that you're going to be cooking, and what ingredients, what vegetables you can use, or fruits that you can use in conjunction with them as well, to add lots and lots of colour. Sauces, if you are going to be using sauces, they will need to be thickened. So typically with sauces, you're going to be slightly undercooking them. You don't want to boil them too much so that you begin to lose texture and that they become too watery. You might need to use cream, you might need to use a little bit of milk or something to thicken up sauces within the photograph. So these are considerations that you will need to make, and we'll be speaking a little bit more about other tricks and other considerations that you can use when it comes to putting these ingredients together, but a little bit of a different approach. You're still going to be cooking the food, but you're not going to be cooking it for consumption, so do bear that in mind. Also, do consider your backgrounds, what you're going to use as a background. Lots and lots of food photography uses lots of texture, lots of colors to add a little bit more depth, a little bit more appeal to the photograph. So think about the food, think about the type of food you're photographing. Food has a personality. We have associations with food. So, healthy food, natural foods. You're going to be wanting to use backgrounds that are quite neutral, quite natural looking. Think about that. But then again, if you're photographing something like chocolate or photographing sweets, you want to use much more colorful backgrounds. You might be using colored card in a situation like that and mixing up some colors together to add a lot of fun. So do think about the type of food you're photographing when considering the background. Natural foods look great with a bit of texture. You'll often see wood grain being used, or tea towels or things like that, cloths, just anything with a little bit of texture in it with natural foods. Less colourful foods need to be lifted by a background. So if you think about meat, for example, meat doesn't have a lot of colour, very beige. So you want to really consider the background that you're using to help lift it. So again, a neutral background, kind of white or black backgrounds are good for photographing that, just to help them stand out a little bit more, not get a little bit lost in the background. So neutral colours in most cases. Bright, bold colours, as I mentioned earlier, you can add fun to fun foods, cakes, desserts and so on. One thing you're really going to want to avoid at all costs really is hard shadows. Now, it doesn't look too bad in this photograph, but it can really take away from the food, and this becomes almost more like a still life photograph rather than an appealing photograph about food. So avoid hard shadows. They take away from the appeal of food. You can lose details in the shadows. Generally, most type of food photography, now not all food photography, but the majority of food photography does have a little bit of shadow in it, but it's usually quite a soft shadow, because you want to try and lift the food as much as possible to show as much detail in the food as possible. So do avoid very hard shadows. This is where a reflector really helps to lift those shadows up a little bit and reduce them as much as possible. And also consider props. Props really help to add a lot more to a photograph. They can help to really fill up a photograph. They can help to really add another visual element, much more a nicer aesthetic to the shot, simply by the placement of props. So do think about using plates, think about knives, forks, spoons, kitchen utensils. Toothpicks are a great thing to use as well. They help to keep food together. Think about using herbs, we mentioned that earlier, herbs, spices, anything to add a little bit of colour. Flour is a great one to use as well, lots of texture in that. Ramekins are used to help boost soups. You can put ramekins into soup to lift them. They're also used then as well. You can just put some ingredients into them, put some sauces into them as a side plate beside the food. Salt and pepper grinders, great to go beside them as well. So, and glasses and jars, a variety of glasses and jars that you can use. All of using them together or being selective about which ones you can use can really add life to your photograph and simply give you much more options. So lots of things to consider there on the checklist to be sure to check off before you get out there and you start photographing your food. Now, what about the actual setup? So what are you going to use to photograph? Well, the first thing that I would recommend that you try out is your phone. Phones love food photography. They are absolutely great for food. They're very easy to maneuver, to move around the foods, to try lots of different angles to get very, very close. And some, like this Samsung S8 phone I'm currently using myself, actually has a food mode built into it. So certainly phone companies are recognizing that so many people photograph their food through their phones, whether it's to go up onto Instagram or to be used on a website or a blogging site. They are very, very versatile. So a really great place to start if you happen to be using a phone, or if you haven't explored much mobile phone photography, smartphone photography, this is a good area to explore it with. And then obviously one of the big advantages of this then is you can post up your photographs straight away onto Instagram if you're so inclined. If you want to get a little bit more professional with your food photography, a nifty 50 is an absolute great investment. As a lens all round, it should be one that every photographer owns. Incredibly versatile lens for so many different situations, but it's a great place to start with food photography as well. Now, this one that I have on display is a 1.4 version, a little bit more expensive, but you can pick up a 50mm f1.8 version for pretty much any single type of camera out there, and they're very, very affordable. You shouldn't be spending more than €200 at the most on a nifty 50 f1.8. A very good all-rounder for food photography. It has a decent close focus on it as well, but it gives a very, very close approximation to what the human eye sees, the focused field of vision that the human eye sees. So when we take a photograph using a 50mm lens, its reproduction of the food is very, very close to what we would expect the food to look like in real life, which makes it a very good lens when we're trying to sell food, when we're thinking about how people visually assess food and how we can make it more appealing to a viewer. We can absolutely try out macro as well. Macro very, very popular with food photography. A 70 to 100mm range is good range to have a look at when we're talking about macro, because it allows us to keep a little bit more distance. But keeping that little bit more distance also gives us a nice flatter background. So we get a nice depth of field, we get a nice perspective with a macro lens at a longer focal length. Obviously it'll allow much closer focusing as well. You don't want to go too close in all of your photographs. So, you want to still be able to see exactly what it is that you're eating. You don't want to go too abstract with these food photographs, well, depending on the nature of the shot, but generally you want to try and just keep a little bit of distance so we can get a look at all of the ingredients, look at the arrangement of the food. But longer focal length will allow a nice flat background to give you a little bit of a different perspective. A very specialist lens, and certainly one we haven't covered yet at all in any of these lessons, is a tilt shift lens. Tilt shift. You may be familiar with tilt shift photography because it's used to produce this toy photography effect that's very, very popular. But tilt shift lenses are also used very much in the world of architectural photography to help give straight lines without the need for doing post-production, without the need to straighten those lines and perspectives afterwards. But they are used in food photography as well. Let's just look at what a tilt shift lens does. So have a look at this photograph here. Okay, so take a close look at this picture. There's something slightly different about this particular photograph that may not be apparent straight away, but have a close look at what's going on here in this shot. Do you notice something unusual about it? Now, it can be a little bit difficult to see in truth, but think about the plane of focus, the plane of focus in this shot. Typically, when we photograph a subject, and we photograph it in the shadow depth of field, we can see the plane of focus is usually horizontal. However, if I isolate this, we can see that the plane of focus is actually on a diagonal. So the plane of focus is actually on a diagonal here, meaning that our depth of field has actually been shifted over to the right hand side and a little bit on the left hand side in the foreground. So you can see it a lot clearer here when I have the depth of field highlighted in red there, that plane of focus is actually on a diagonal, and that is what a tilt shift lens will allow us to do. It'll allow us to change the plane of focus and the perspective in a photograph. Okay, so a tilt shift. So the tilt is used to change the orientation of the plane of focus, like in this case the diagonal, and the shift will allow us to adjust the position of the subject within the image without having to move the camera. So we can actually change where the image or where the subject in the photograph is without having to move, without having to change the focus, without having to change the position of the camera. We can use the dials, we can use the shift function to actually move it within camera. But here it's pretty much focusing on the tilt part, used to change that plane of focus. Now, the thing with tilt shift lenses is they are very, very expensive. So you're talking about €2,000. You can get slightly older versions of them for about €1,500. Very specialist, very difficult to use, and very, very expensive. So these should only really be looked at if you're in a position to afford one, and if you plan on doing some serious professional food photography work. Now, so moving on to some accessories to help us with our lighting. I've mentioned these throughout this lesson. Reflectors, you may have seen these before. Certainly if you visit your local camera shop, these you sell the 5-in-1 reflectors that have different varieties of them. But a reflector basically does exactly what it sounds. It reflects light. So it bounces light back on to our subject, and they are very flexible, so they can be shaped to specifically bounce the light onto a small part of the subject if needed. They're very, very useful for lifting shadows, very, very versatile and easily maneuvered and easily placed just outside of the frame. So let's just have a look at an example here. So here we can see over on the left hand side we have a very large reflector in this case, picking up lots and lots of light and bouncing it back onto the subject. So we can see the natural light coming in here from the right hand side being bounced back and really doing a great job of lifting those shadows. Doesn't reduce shadows entirely, but it will help to minimize them and just add a softness to them as well. They're also great for portraits, and certainly we're going to be looking at them again when we start talking about studio lighting too. Reflectors can often act like a second light source in a scene when used correctly. And speaking of lights, now there's two types of lights available to photographers. There's continuous lights. They are ones that are always on. You simply switch them on and they stay on. Or we also have strobe lighting, and strobe lighting is more our typical flash. So when you get that pop of light. Continuous lights are a better place to start. They're much more affordable. You can instantly see what you're doing. They're easier to expose with. Strobe lights will offer much more power, much more versatility in the long run, but they're much more expensive, and you do need to know how to use them. We'll be talking about strobe lights in our studio photography lesson. But if you are thinking about going for a lights kit, a lighting setup, I strongly recommend that you investigate continuous lights to begin with. And again, here we see a softbox attachment on this particular one. So a softbox helps to diffuse light. It helps to spread out light nice and evenly, again producing nice soft shadows. So here you can see a simple setup used in conjunction with a reflector to help bounce light back onto the subject. So this is what we would have. We have a key light and what we have called a fill light. And again, these are terms we're going to have a look at in a future lesson. But a key light would be our main light source, which in this case happens to be coming from our studio light here, our continuous light. And our fill light is our secondary light source, which helps to lift shadows but without overwhelming that key light. So that's how you can use a one light setup here. This is a one light setup with a reflector for effective food photography. And as you can see, it's a very, very straightforward setup. Nice bit of texture here added there with the palettes there as well to give a nice natural effect to this scene. So that's really all you need to get started with your food photography from a technical viewpoint. Really, most of your effectiveness when it comes to food photography is going to be in how you present that food. So very simple, straightforward lighting setups here, natural light, lots of evenly spread lighting over the food, but really to take your food photography a step further, this is where you're going to get creative. So let's have a look at some ideas, let's have a look at some inspiration and other things to consider. The first thing is to explore your angles. Explore as many angles as possible. Don't just shoot food from up above, although it is a good place to start. But you should be photographing for about 2 hours, as I said earlier. 2 hours is typically the limit because you'll probably find yourselves getting a little bit tired, a little bit exhausted, and really in 2 hours you should have explored pretty much every angle that your food can offer up to you. Okay, so it should give you plenty of time to try out lots of different things. Shooting from above, as I said, is a given, but do remember to get low, to get close, to get far, to get wide. Try lots and lots of different approaches when it comes to photographing your food, and don't forget to move the food around as well. Let's just have a look at some examples. So here we have some artichokes photographed against natural light. We can very clearly see the natural light here. Quite a lot of shadow here, but the shadows are still soft. We can still see lots and lots of detail, a little bit of texture there as well with some bark. Okay, so then the photographer tried a different approach here with the same artichokes, photographing from above, arranging them at a nice kind of 90-degree angle, but using then some tins, some old baking trays here to add a bit of texture. We have a little bit of texture there with the background there as well, kind of, I don't know whether it's a marble or kind of granite type of backgrounds. Then also photographing low, just on a plate, and cutting those artichokes in half as well. So 3 simple approaches, each of them as effective as each other. Now obviously cutting the artichokes in half would be happening at the end of the shoot. So do think about that as well. Think about the process. Think about the start and the middle and the end of eating food. Okay, so you can always be photographing that as well, and you can also, of course, be cutting up your food into lots of different shapes to try out lots of different types of shots. Now, a few lessons ago, we spoke a lot about colour and colour theory, and this is where you're going to be putting it into practice. So colours are what make food appealing. Now, some foods will lack colour. Like I said, meats are often very brown, very beige, so it can be difficult to photograph them, so we need to add a little bit of colour to them. Or with bright, very, very bright colours, we may need to try and tone them down, but it all really depends on what it is you're trying to achieve. The one thing I would say, first of all, is that all food generally looks very good against white. So simple white plates, if you're really struggling, a simple white plate should be a solution, should be your go-to if you're struggling to get the photograph. But let's have a look at some examples. So if we think about our colour theory, you have a look at these photographs here of these different pastries, and we think about how these colours work together. So we've got very much got analogous colours happening here in this shot. Lots of different variations of brown. Brown can be a difficult colour to work with, but it does work in this particular photograph because it is also a natural colour. It is a colour we associate, with kind of natural foods, natural breads. So, a very good idea here to pair it up with different types of brown to give a nice analogous colour palette. We can also think about our triadic colours. So if you remember, our triadic colours are triangular colours that are equal spaces apart. Here we have our classic red, green and blue, slight variation on the blue, and gives a very contrasty photograph. A lot of colour here in this, only 3 colours but very contrasting colours, and a real pop, a real wow factor to this shot. It kind of really gets across I suppose the heat and the impact of these chilies. You can think about our kind of more monochromatic colours, a little bit of white here, a little bit of highlights here just to lift it, but we've got a very simple kind of monochromatic set up here. Different variations of red in the photograph, a little bit of fun here with these macaroons. And then you can have very, very colourful photographs here. So here we've got lots of primary colours, but kind of balanced out a little bit then with the kind of darker browns and the deep shades of the wood block here, just to add a little bit of contrast here. But very, very appealing photograph here. And I mentioned those red onions earlier on, really adding a lot of purple to the shot. You know, it's a nice playful colour, great against the green. So do think about how you mix those colours, and as I mentioned, colour theory, do reference that lesson when you're thinking about what foods you're putting together and how those colours should work together. Arranging your food can help you to add a little bit of artistic flair to your photograph, you know, to get artistic and playful with your food. Typically, if you're making food, you're probably not going to spend as much time arranging it like this particular photograph here before you eat it. But do remember, your aim here is to get the viewer enticed and to make the food look appetizing. And by simple arrangements like this, we can very clearly see the ingredients that are being used here as well, and it adds a little bit of fun to the photograph too. So you can try out geometric kind of shapes, clusters, clustering certain ingredients together, or you can think very, very carefully about mixing all the ingredients up together, but still being very specific in how it's arranged and how each element is placed in the photograph. And this comes to styling our food as well. Just adding those extra little bits of garnish, oils or grilling foods, just to make them look much more appetizing. Like you can see here in these simple brownies, just adding a little bit of frosting to the top here certainly makes them look much more appealing to us. There's lots of tools that you can use here to help with your styling of food, and I would recommend investing in some tweezers to help place small little items around the plate. You want some paper towels to wipe off plates as well, to wipe off excess oils or anything like that. Some paint brushes can be used then, especially when it comes to painting meats. If you want to paint some oil, even some brown shoe polish which can be used for painting brown onto meats to make them look more evenly cooked. Water spritzers to add some condensation to glasses. You can mix this with glycerine. Mixing it with glycerine, it helps the water to stick to glasses. So if you want to keep that condensation for longer, or you want to photograph droplets of water on food, mix with some glycerine, and that'll just help to keep it for a little bit longer. Squeeze bottles for sauces, they're great for sauces, so you can create little circles, you can create designs with the sauces a lot easier than if you were just coming straight out of a bottle. Cooking spray and oil, just add a little bit of moisture to your food, to your meats and so on. Food colorings as well. Food colorings can be added to some foods as well to change the color if needs be. And I mentioned toothpicks earlier. Toothpicks are great for keeping things like burgers and sandwiches together so that they don't fall apart. And eyedroppers again can be used for just specifically planting little droplets of moisture to your food. I mean, really, when it comes to styling your food, it's actually a really good idea to have a look at shows like MasterChef or any other kind of cooking show, just to see how professionals do it, because that is the approach that you are going to be taking. With our food photography as well, you can get a little bit more conceptual with it. Like, for example, this type of photograph would be very often used for fast food photography, where we're photographing individual elements, and we're bringing them together then later on in Photoshop to kind of create situations that are typically not easy to capture, but do think about it. You can go a much more non-traditional route with your food photography. It doesn't always have to be so straightforward. You literally want to play with your food when it comes to conceptual food photography, and think about adding a human element to it as well. Seeing people involved in the process of making food or seeing people enjoying food will help us to relate to that as well. It makes us trust the process, and if we see somebody actually enjoying that food too, it helps us to relate to it and makes it much more appetizing to us. Now, one of the areas of fascination for photographers and non-photographers alike is how food photographers fake it. So a lot of people would be, and I'm sure a lot of you are aware of this already, that, and I mentioned it at the start of the lesson, very often what we see in food photography isn't actually what it is or what we think it is. There's lots and lots of tricks that photographers use to help make their food look better in a photograph. Some foods just can be difficult to photograph, so there's lots of different ways that we can do it. So one of the first things is that when it comes to meat, you want to undercook meat, okay? So you may not like to have your steak as rare as this or medium rare, but undercooking foods does help to make it look much more succulent, and that goes for any type of meat, not just for steaks. But if you're photographing, say, chicken, you want to undercook that chicken. You want to finish it off. Then, like I said, sometimes photographers will paint a bit of shoe polish, mix up a little bit of shoe polish, brown shoe polish, and actually paint it onto a chicken to give it that brown look. In some cases, they won't even cook the chicken or the turkey, whatever it is. They will actually just paint it on because it looks much more plump, it looks much more succulent. So when it comes to meats, you want to undercook those meats, and just be sure to get rid of any excess kind of fluids or anything like that comes out of them as well. When it comes to meat too, very often you'll see that meats are grilled in photographs, and this is actually something that's added afterwards. You can get a little charcoal starter, which is used for just adding slight grilling to meats, and it's usually used then in just adding a couple of charcoal lines to some meats here, like you can see in this photograph. It's also used for grilling vegetables too. You can get them online. They're very, very affordable little things. Charcoal starters, they're only about you probably be spending about €10 on one, if not just a small little bit more. Good investment if you plan on photographing a lot of meat and veg, just to add that nice kind of charcoal, char grilled effect to your meats. Dish soap is used when it comes to drinks like fizzy drinks, or even alcohol as well, beers in particular, to help keep bubbles and to help apply a foamy head to beers too. It's actually, if you ever watch any kind of soap operas or anything like that as well, very often they'll use the same effect. If the beers are just sitting on the table, you'll often quite see they have these great magnificent foamy heads on them, and that's just coming from a little bit of dish soap that's been added to the beers. So that's used to help keep fizzy drinks fizzy, to keep the bubbles going, and to add nice foamy heads to beer as well. Another very popular one is using motor oil for pancakes. So if you're a big fan of pancakes, you'll know that when you're putting your maple syrup on them, that they tend to absorb that maple syrup quite quickly, especially if you're photographing for a long time, they will just become a soggy mess. So motor oil is used because it's not absorbed by the pancakes as rapidly. Also, what's used is cardboard. So cardboard is placed between the pancakes as well, just to help to add a little bit of height. You'd never normally see pancakes like this if you ordered them. They'd be usually a lot flatter, and certainly they would absorb a lot of the oil that's applied to them. So motor oil is used for pancakes. Whipped cream is typically not whipped cream, but it's usually shaving foam. Shaving foam is used as whipped cream because it helps to keep its shape. It doesn't melt as fast either, so very difficult to style whipped cream because it does melt, but shaving foam is used instead because it will keep its shape, and it does not melt as fast. And when it comes to milk, wood glue is often used. So wood glue, it appears white, so that it has a much thicker density as well. So that means that foods will sit on top of it. So it's absolutely great for cereals, and obviously then one of the benefits of that as well is the fact that you're using glue. It will help to keep all of the food in place as well. You can absolutely use it not just for cereals, but if you want to photograph a glass of milk, you want to have a couple of drops of milk going down the side, and that you can use wood glue. And that's just some of them. There is so many others out there. Do check them out online. But before you get to that stage where you start using all of these different tricks, I would recommend that you take a more natural approach with your food photography and see what you can achieve with it. You might find that there's a particular type of food that you prefer to photograph, and when you get to that stage, then you can start looking at using some of these tricks to help with your food photography. But you need to try it and understand it first before you start implementing these kind of more advanced techniques into your food photography. But as you've seen from this lesson, it's very much about your preparation and then about your arrangement, and less about the actual photographs and the techniques themselves. That part of it is actually quite straightforward, but the majority of your work is actually going to be within the setup and within creating the food before actually taking the photograph. So let's have a look at what's going to be coming up then in the next lesson, and it's our final lesson of this module. It's all about wildlife photography. Very exciting lesson. So we're going to be talking equipment and techniques. Quite a bit of equipment now here needed when it comes to wildlife photography. It can be a very technical area as well, so we'll be talking about that quite extensively. We'll have a look at planning your shoot, and we'll talk about animal behavior. Something you'll have to be very, very aware of when it comes to photographing animals. For your challenge, I'd like you to cook your favorite food and to photograph it. So you're going to have to do a little bit of work here. I want you to cook your favorite food, and I want you to photograph it and tell us why it's your favorite food as well. When it comes to this type of photography, very often food, we have lots of stories, we have associations with our food, very good memories of a food. So cook your favorite food and post a photograph of it, facebook.com/Shaw Academy. Now, just want to take a moment as well to talk about Module 3. So Module 3 is coming up very, very soon. So I want to give you a quick preview of exactly what it is we're going to be looking at on that module. And really what Module 3 is all about is light. We're going to be having a look at how we can master light in our photographs. So we're going to start digging into things like, first of all, we need to have a talk about histograms and how we can use histograms to accurately measure the exposure in our photography. So without relying on the camera's LCD, which is very often inaccurate, how we can use histograms to accurately read what is happening with the light in our photographs, how we can then use that information to master our different metering modes. So you may have seen these on your cameras before and wondered what they are used for, but metering modes will basically change how we read light, how the camera reads light in the scene, and they're very, very beneficial for different scenarios. For example, spot metering, incredibly accurate way of reading light, but kind of tricky to use. We have partial metering, very good for portraits. They just basically give us more options how to read light in tricky situations. We'll have a look at filters, how these can be used to change the properties of light, particularly for overcoming exposure issues and allowing us longer exposure times. We'll also have a look at polarizing filters, what they do and how we can use them effectively. We'll also talk about understanding the different types of light in general. So we've touched on it a few times throughout these lessons, but this lesson specifically about understanding light will go in depth into the different types of light, into the direction of light, and how we can best use it to add another element to our photography. We'll talk about flash photography. This will be 2 lessons long because there's a huge amount involved when it comes to flash photography. We're going to have to be having a look at, first of all, the types of flashes that are available to us, and then how we can actually use flash. And then we'll finish things off by having a look at studio photography. Again, 2 lessons all about how to set a studio up for yourself, how to use the equipment, and how to create studio photographs. Really exciting lessons and a really exciting module. So depending on the type of membership that you're on, whether you're on 1 month, 3 months, 6 months, or 12 months, you may need to extend your membership to give yourself more time. So you can extend this through your student dashboard, to your emails as well. You'll see the options to extend your membership out. If you're on a 1 month, you can simply let it roll over. If you're on 3 months, you can simply let it roll over, and so on. But the longer membership options, like your 6 month and your 12-month options, they are much better value. They give you the benefit of time to complete the course and to indeed go on and check out and complete other courses related to photography. Or perhaps you want to have a look at some of our other courses. Remember, this gives you access to every single course we have here in Shaw Academy. If you have any questions about it, if you're unsure about anything, remember to email us as well at support@shawacademy.com. But of course, I'll be talking about it a little bit more in the next lesson as well. So for now, I'll leave it there. Thank you so much for joining me for this lesson. I do hope that you enjoyed it, and I'll see you all back here very soon for our final lesson in Module 2, Wildlife Photography. So until then, take care. Bye-bye. Hello everyone, and welcome back to the Professional Diploma in Photography. Did you know, well, this isn't really a did you know, but are you looking at ice cream? Are you looking at mashed potatoes? Very, very difficult to tell. When it comes to food photography, photographers use a huge number of tricks to make food look more appealing, even though sometimes it is not exactly what it seems. We'll be having a look a little bit later on in the lesson on how you can fake it with your food photography. So of course you are here with myself, William Eames, your educator as always. And as I always say at the start of every lesson, showing up is the key to success. You really should be seeing a huge amount of progression with your photography at this stage. Your knowledge in photography, your terminology around photography, and hopefully your ideas around photography too. As usual, if you have any questions, please do remember to ask Morpheus. Tries to answer as many questions as he can. If there's anything you can't answer, do please let us know at support@shawacademy.com, and as usual, do rate those responses. So this lesson is all about food photography, a very fast growing area of photography, especially in terms of its commercial side in terms of your ability to make money as a photographer, it is a very lucrative area. It's also a very fascinating area to explore, especially if you're into cooking and you have yourself a blog, or you're really into food and nutrition. You want to be doing your own photographs for your own website, or if you plan to get out there and start selling some of your photographs, if you're doing some stock photography, or you want to sell some of your images to cookbooks or restaurants and so on, there is a huge demand for this type of photography. So I think it's a very good time to have a look at it and to cover it. So we're going to have a look, first of all, where to start, how to get yourself prepared. We'll have a look at some equipment. You don't need a huge amount of equipment to do food photography, which is a great thing about it. And then we'll have a look at some ways that you can, I suppose, fake it, and some tricks and tips that you can use as well. And really, when it comes to food photography, it's all about preparation. It's all about being creative, and really it's almost like cooking itself. You really need to consider the ingredients and everything that you use. So let's have a look at where to start. And the very first thing that you should do is to make a list of exactly what it is that you want to photograph. It's almost like a shopping list that you're going to be making here. What type of food do you want to photograph? Do you want to photograph gourmet food? Do you want to photograph kind of rustic food? Do you want to photograph desserts? Do you want to photograph cakes? You need to think about this, because you're going to need lots of props, lots of accessories, and lots of ingredients. So you definitely want to plan what type of food it is that you're going to photograph. I think it's a good idea to sketch out a few different angles, a few different ideas on the placement of where the food is going to be, the colors that you're going to be using, some props that you might like to try out with it as well. Consider your prop placement in those sketches, and props are going to be key really to filling the photograph and making it look more appetizing. You want to consider where your light is going to be coming from, what type of light you're going to be photographing. You're going to be prepared to photograph for hours. So this is something you're going to spend quite a bit of time photographing. You should be shooting for at least about 2 hours maximum, exploring every kind of possibility, every angle that you can get out of the food. Think about the theme. What are you going to be photographing? Is it going to be editorial, kind of work you'd see in a magazine? Is it going to be commercial, something that you'd see for advertisements, for restaurants? Or is it just for fun? Is it for yourself? Is it for a blog? Is it for Instagram? Is it just something you're going to be sharing on social media? Where are these photographs going to be seen? Quite similar to the previous point. Who exactly is going to be seeing these photographs? Who are your target market? Is it going to be for something for a business, or is it something just for personal use? Because it will change how you think about the photographs. So these are the questions that you should be asking yourself before you go out and you start purchasing all your ingredients. You're also going to need a location to photograph, and when it comes to food photography, natural light works best, especially for natural ingredients. If